The town where every witness mysteriously died before trial. The scream tore through the night, just as the courthouse clock struck midnight. Sheriff Daniel Ross ran toward the sound, his boots splashing through puddles on Main Street. When he reached the Witten Protection House, the front door was wide open. Inside, the walls were splattered with blood, but no body. Only a trail of muddy footprints led to the back door and out into the woods. The wind howled as if warning him to turn back. Daniel's flashlight flickered, and then just beyond the tree line, he saw it. A shadowy figure standing still, holding something in its hand. A cell phone. The screen lit up for a moment, showing the face of the missing witness, Carla Green. Her eyes wide, terrified, her lips forming silent words before the light cut out. By morning, the whole town of Clearwater, Virginia, was awake. People whispered outside diners and gas stations, their voices shaky. Carla was the fifth witness to vanish before trial. The fifth person who could have spoken against the men who ran the old lumber mill. The same men everyone knew controlled half the town's police force. No one said it aloud, but everyone thought the same thing. Anyone who talks ends up dead. 2 months earlier, Carla had come forward after seeing something near the old mill late one night. Men unloading black crates into a pickup truck behind the factory. She told Sheriff Ross she didn't want trouble, just to do the right thing. He promised her protection, but she never really believed the town was safe. People in Clearwater didn't talk much about the mill. It had been closed for years, but its owners still had money, cars, and power. They also had friends in dark places. The sheriff had already lost 3 witnesses the same way. One drowned, another found in a burned car, and one simply vanished. The town paper called it coincidence. Daniel called it murder. He didn't trust his own deputies anymore. Too many of them looked away whenever the mill's name came up. That night, he sat in his office staring at Carla's last text message. It read, "They know I talked." Later that day, Daniel drove out to the mill. The gates were locked with heavy chains, but the air smelled faintly of oil and smoke, as if someone had been there recently. He climbed over the fence and walked around the main building. Deep tire marks carved through the mud behind the warehouse. He followed them to an open field where a small wooden cross had been placed in the dirt. On it was a single name, Henry Ward, one of the earlier witnesses who had died in a supposed car accident. His stomach turned. Someone was marking their victims. As he stood there, a car engine started in the distance. Daniel crouched behind a truck as headlights swept across the field. 2 men got out, both wearing dark coats. He recognized one of them instantly, Deputy Ray Collins, his own partner. The other man was unfamiliar, but his voice was calm and low. "We have one more to deal with," the stranger said. "Then the trial dies with them." Daniel's breath froze. They were planning another hit. But who was next? He waited until they left, then drove back to town, heart pounding. When he reached his office, he found an envelope on his desk. No name, no address, just a small thumb drive inside. He plugged it into his computer, and a video began to play. The footage was grainy, shot from what looked like a hidden camera. Carla was sitting in a chair, bound, her eyes darting around the room. A distorted voice asked her one question. "Who else knows what you saw?" She looked straight at the camera and whispered, "Daniel Ross." The screen went black. For a long moment, the sheriff sat frozen, unable to move. Then the phone on his desk started ringing. When he answered, a voice on the other end spoke calmly. "Sheriff, you're next." The line went dead. Outside, thunder rolled across Clearwater. The lights in the station flickered, and through the window, Daniel saw a black sedan parked across the street, engine running. The driver never stepped out. The headlights stayed fixed on him, burning through the rain. Then, suddenly, the car door opened. Rain fell hard against the sheriff's office windows, drumming like a warning. Daniel Ross stayed frozen in his chair, staring at the phone. The voice still echoed in his mind. "Sheriff, you're next." He reached for his gun, checked the chamber, and looked out again. The black sedan was still there, but the driver was gone. Only the car lights cut through the mist, steady and bright, like unblinking eyes. He moved carefully to the back door, stepping out into the wet night. The air smelled of gasoline and pine. His heart hammered as he approached the car, gun raised. When he yanked open the driver's door, no one was inside. Just a faint smell of cigar smoke and a folded note on the dashboard. It read, "Don't run. It won't matter." Before he could react, a loud crack echoed from the edge of the street. A gunshot. The windshield shattered beside him, and Daniel ducked behind the car. Another shot rang out. He returned fire toward the tree line, flashes lighting up the dark. Then everything went still, only the rain falling again. Whoever it was, they were gone. Daniel called for backup. No one answered. The radio hissed, dead silent. He cursed under his breath and drove straight to Carla Green's last known address, a small trailer at the edge of Clearwater. When he got there, he noticed the door hanging loose. Inside, the place looked ransacked. The kitchen floor was covered in broken glass and muddy prints. But what froze him was the smell: bleach. Someone had cleaned up in a hurry. Then in the corner of the room, he saw it. Carla's phone, lying face down beside a half-burnt photograph. He picked it up. The photo showed 6 people, all smiling in front of the lumber mill. 4 of them were already dead. The 5th was Carla. The 6th was Ray Collins, his partner. Daniel's stomach sank. He realized the men at the mill weren't just criminals. They had police protection. Maybe more. He had to move fast before the next witness disappeared. There was still one left alive, a young mechanic named Luke Baxter. Luke had seen a black van near the mill the night of the murders, and his testimony was scheduled for the next morning. If what Daniel overheard was true, Luke was the next target. He sped toward Luke's shop on the outskirts of town, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. The road was empty and slick. As he approached, he saw the garage light still on. Good. Luke might still be inside. Daniel parked, stepped out, and called his name. Luke. It's Sheriff Ross. No answer. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell of motor oil and damp metal filled the air. Tools lay scattered across the floor, a chair knocked over. A radio played faint country music in the corner. Then Daniel's flashlight caught something glinting, a chain. Luke was tied to a chair, head slumped forward, duct tape over his mouth. Daniel rushed over, ripping the tape off. Luke, can you hear me? Luke's lips trembled. They're coming back, he whispered hoarsely. They said no one testifies. Not in this town. Who's they? Daniel asked, cutting the chains. Luke's eyes darted toward the window. The sheriff's men, he whispered. Your partner. Before Daniel could respond, the lights went out. The whole garage went black, and through the broken window, the beam of a flashlight swept across the walls. Someone was outside. Daniel raised his gun and motioned for Luke to stay quiet. Then, from the darkness, a voice called softly, Sheriff Ross. You should have stayed out of this. The garage door creaked open. Lightning flashed, revealing 3 men in raincoats, one of them, unmistakably, Deputy Ray Collins. He pointed his gun straight at Daniel and said, almost kindly, You've been asking too many questions, partner. Daniel fired first. Glass shattered, metal clanged, and the room filled with thunder and smoke. Luke screamed. When the gunfire stopped, Daniel dug behind a workbench, ears ringing. He peered out through the haze and saw Ray standing in the doorway, gun still smoking. You can't save him, Ray said. It's already done. Then, behind him, something burst into flames. The sedan they'd come in was burning, flames climbing fast toward the garage. Daniel turned back to Luke, who was trembling uncontrollably. We have to move now, he shouted. But Luke didn't move. He was staring at the door, eyes wide, pointing behind Daniel. The sheriff spun around and froze. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the fire, tall, still, holding a gun, and it wasn't Ray. The fire behind the figure burned brighter, turning the man's outline into a shadow made of flame. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. His mind scrambled to understand what he was seeing. The stranger stepped closer, smoke curling around him, and spoke in a calm, deep voice. You're in the wrong fight, Sheriff. Daniel aimed his gun, but the man lifted a badge, old, rusted, but real. Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said. Name's Agent Walker. Lower your weapon. FBI. Daniel growled. Where were you when 5 witnesses died? Walker looked him straight in the eye, trying to keep the 6th one alive. Behind them, the fire roared louder. Ray Collins, bleeding from the shoulder, staggered his feet and aimed his weapon at both of them. You think he's here to help you? Ray shouted. You don't know who you're dealing with, Ross. Daniel hesitated. Walker raised his hand slowly. He's not wrong, the agent said, but it's not me you should be afraid of. Then, without warning, a second explosion shook the ground. The gas tanks outside had ignited. The blast threw them all to the floor. Glass and metal rained down. The heat was unbearable. Daniel pulled Luke by the arm and dragged him through the back exit. Walker followed, coughing in the smoke. As they stumbled into the rain, the burning garage collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks. The 3 men crouched by the ditch, gasping for air. Walker wiped soot from his face. They're erasing everything, every trace of the case. He turned to Daniel. You've got a mole in your department. Not just one. Half your team's been taking money from the mill for years. Daniel stared at him, disbelief and rage colliding inside. You expect me to believe that? Walker opened his coat and pulled out a flash drive identical to the one Daniel had received earlier. You already know it's true. That video of Carla? That wasn't a threat. It was a test. Someone wanted to see what you'd do next. Luke looked terrified. So they're still watching us? Right now, Walker said flatly. And if they know we're together, we won't see sunrise. Daniel stood, mind spinning. He thought about every phone call that had gone unanswered, every report that had vanished from his office. The corruption went deeper than he'd imagined. What do they want? He asked. Walker looked out toward the dark forest. Not money. Silence. There's something buried under that lumber mill, Sheriff. Something people have killed to keep secret. Lightning flashed overhead, and for a brief second, Daniel saw a movement in the trees. Several figures watching them from the distance. We need to get to my station, he said, reaching for his car keys. Walker shook his head. No, that's the first place they'll look. Then where? The agent's eyes narrowed. The old water plant. It's off-grid. No cameras, no phones. We can talk there. As they hurried through the rain toward Walker's SUV, Luke suddenly stopped. Wait, he said, his voice trembling. There's something I didn't tell you. Daniel turned. What is it? Luke swallowed hard. The night I saw those men by the mill, they weren't just unloading crates. They were burying something. A body, maybe 2. And he paused, shaking. I think one of them was wearing a police uniform. Walker and Daniel exchanged a tense glance. The pieces were starting to form a picture neither of them wanted to see. Daniel spoke quietly. We'll dig it up ourselves. But just as they reached the SUV, a distant siren began to wail from town. It wasn't police. It was the old mill alarm, the one that hadn't gone off in years. Walker froze. That's their signal, he said. Someone knows you're still alive. A second later, headlights flared at the end of the road. 3 black vehicles speeding toward them through the rain. Daniel grabbed Luke's arm and shouted, Get in! Bullets cracked through the night as they dove inside the SUV. Glass shattered. Tires screeched. The car fishtailed on the wet pavement as Daniel slammed the accelerator. Walker fired back through the broken window, hitting one of the pursuers. But they were outnumbered. The vehicles closed in fast, boxing in between the trees and the cliff edge. Then, as the engine roared and the rain poured harder, Luke screamed, They're not stopping! Daniel's eyes went wide. The last thing he saw in the rearview mirror was a truck ramming straight toward them. The impact came like thunder. Everything went white. The world was silent for a few seconds. Then came the ringing, the crackle of flames, the groan of twisted metal. Rain hissed as it hit the fire. Daniel Ross blinked hard, coughing smoke from his lungs. The SUV was upside down in a ditch, its windshield shattered, steam pouring from the engine. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed faintly, then cut out. Walker, he shouted hoarsely. Luke. He crawled out through the broken window, glass cutting his palms. The forest was dark. lit only by the burning wreck of the truck that had rammed them. 2 other vehicles had crashed along the road. Men in dark coats lay scattered in the mud. One was still moving, crawling toward a gun. Daniel kicked it away and pointed his weapon. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man coughed, blood running down his chin. "It doesn't matter," he rasped. "You're already part of it." Then he smiled weakly and fell still. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned and saw Walker dragging himself from the wreck, his arm bleeding badly. "Luke's gone," Walker gasped. "He was thrown out before we hit." Daniel looked around frantically, calling his name, until a faint sound answered from deeper in the woods. A moan, then a cough. They followed it and found Luke lie at the base of a tree, dazed but alive. His hands were trembling as he pointed toward the distance. "Someone was here," he said. "They were watching the crash." Daniel turned his flashlight toward the tree line. For a split second, he saw movement. Someone retreating into the fog. "We can't stay here," Walker said. "They'll send more." They hiked through the woods for nearly an hour, soaked and freezing, until the shape of the old water plant appeared through the rain, a rusted building, long abandoned, with shattered windows and vines climbing its walls. Inside, it smelled of mold and iron. The roof leaked in thin streams, and an old generator hummed faintly in the corner. Walker tore a piece of fabric from his coat to wrap his arm. "We'll be safe here for a few hours," he said. "Long enough to talk." Daniel stared at the ground, trying to slow his breathing. "Talk about what?" Walker took a deep breath. "The case that started all this." He pulled a folder from his bag, soaked but still legible. Inside were photographs, old, black and white, taken decades ago. 20 years ago, Walker said, Clearwater Lumber Mill wasn't just cutting wood. They were burying chemical waste. Illegal shipments, military grade. It poisoned the whole valley. The people who found out tried to testify, but every one of them disappeared. Your witnesses weren't the first, Sheriff, just the latest. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. So the murders were meant to bury the truth. Walker nodded. The company went bankrupt on paper, but the men behind it still run half the town. They've got cops, judges, even reporters on their payroll. Anyone who tries to expose them ends up in a ditch or blamed for something they didn't do. Luke swallowed hard. "Then why are you helping us?" Walker hesitated. "Because my brother was one of those first witnesses." His voice cracked slightly. "He never made it to court. I've been chasing these people ever since." Thunder boomed overhead. The generator flickered. Then, from outside, came the low rumble of an engine. Daniel grabbed his gun and looked through a broken window. Headlights again, 2 cars this time, rolling slowly toward the plant. "They found us," Luke whispered. Walker cursed under his breath. "Back door now." They rushed through the dark corridor, their footsteps echoing. Water dripped from the ceiling. Just as they reached the rear exit, the front doors burst open, flashlights and gunfire lighting up the interior. Bullets tore through the walls as Daniel returned fire blindly. Luke stumbled but kept running, his breath ragged. Walker shoved him through the door. "Go!" Daniel turned to cover them, firing his last rounds. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him to the floor. Pain shot through his arm. He heard Walker yell his name, but then, suddenly, everything went quiet again. He looked up. The shooting had stopped. A man stepped into the doorway, calm, composed, holding a pistol pointed straight at him. Daniel froze when he saw his face. "Ray," he whispered. Deputy Collins smiled faintly. "You should have listened, Sheriff. This town doesn't want saving." Walker shouted from behind him, but Ray pulled the trigger before the sound reached. The blast echoed through the plant, sending birds scattering from the trees outside. Daniel fell hard against the concrete. The last thing he saw before darkness closed and was Walker dragging him out into the rain, yelling his name over and over, headlights fading in the distance. And somewhere, faintly through the storm, came the sound of phone ringing from deep inside the mill.